quality. Uh, QCI is in its 26th year of operations. The chairman QCI has always been appointed by Honorable Prime Minister. The first chairman of QCI was Sri Ratan Tata ji. Then equally illustrious people like TVS Velu, etc., have held that mantle. So under the QCI umbrella, there are about 5 boards and whole lot of divisions. NABL you are very familiar with. NABH is what I take care after, look after. We have education and training wing. We have certification body wing. So slowly, by and by, ecosystem for quality which touches every citizen is being created. Uh, while so much work has been done, for example, under the QCI banner, uh, Swachh Sarvekshan, drone project, fisheries, etc. So there are total about 1,000 people sitting in this 0 mile ITO area doing the work of quality. With this background, it was only natural that we come up with such a strong presence as NatHealth, collaborate with them, and we are very fortunate that both NABL and NABH have come together, and we are very thankful, Mr. Bhattacharya, for this opportunity, and to the entire leadership of NatHealth for giving us this opportunity to partner with them. We need an angle which is patient centric, patient facing, citizen facing, because though so much work is being done, for example, we touch about 17,000 hospitals, big and small, in 8 countries, and with interest from another 5 countries. As far as Philippines, we have presence, Muscat, Oman, Middle East, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. So we have our accredited facilities there. But the citizen, the average citizen of the country, does not really recognize patient safety and healthcare quality as they should. So to create the demand, so that pull factor develops, and ultimately the man on the line, the last in the line, they start demanding quality and promote quality. Ultimately, it has to trickle down to them. With that objective in mind, a very simple, elegant solution, the microsite, has been developed, and it's being launched tomorrow. And please give your candid suggestions, feedback, and guidance. I'm very sure that this particular thing will take off, and the entire effort would not have been possible without the unhesitating, undiluted, full support of Mr. Siddharth and his team and the entire leadership of NatHealth. So thank you so much for this opportunity once again. I'm so very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kochar. We would like to express our gratitude and thank you to you for sharing with us the very vision and mission of NABH towards delivering on quality healthcare and your association with NatHealth. I would like to request Dr. Raghuvanshi, sir, to kindly present this token of our gratitude. Please, sir, accept it on our behalf, and we look forward to again having you tomorrow, probably when we have the microsite.
Thank you so much.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we now have the plenary session on health financing. In the morning, we had released the white paper. So, some of the points which we are going to be discussing in this session is on the PPPs, the viability gap funding in healthcare for infrastructure creation, leveraging the Ayushman Bharat Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana network to cover the missing middle, linking reimbursement to health outcomes, and much more. And we are glad that in this August gathering, we have the financing firms, the regulators, the government officials, PE funds, global investors from private insurance companies, hospitals, and multilateral funding agencies joining us in this session. Thank you to our sponsors of the session, ProTribe Services India, and our knowledge partners, PwC. So with that, I invite the distinguished speakers of the session being led by Mr. Sunil Thakur, Treasurer NatHealth, and partner Quadria Capital. May I request him to kindly take center stage. Someone who has an extensive healthcare investment and transaction experience across the Asia Pacific market. He has been involved in some of the landmark deals in the healthcare space, and his career spanning almost 2 decades. He has led and executed multi-billion-dollar deals across the M&A and capital raise. He has a master's degree in international business from the Delhi School of Economics. And he leads the session. I request him once again to take center stage, as he's also going to be setting the context to this session. We'll also have the presentation on the health financing paper, which was released in the morning. And towards that, the presentation will be by Mr. Ashish Rampuria, Director PwC. We are then going to be here having panel discussions. There are going to be two panels here. The first panel is the discussion on the PPPs, VJF in healthcare for infrastructure creation. The session chair I invite Mr. Rajiv Kumar Sen, Senior Advisor, Niti Aayog. The moderator of the session, Mr. Mohit Kullar, Managing Director of O3 Capital. May I request you all to please join us? The distinguished speakers of the session, Ms. Visalakshi Chandramouli, the founding partner, Tata Capital Healthcare Fund, Mr. Pankaj Sinha, Investment Officer at IFC, the International Finance Corporation, Dr. Pranav Mohan. He's going to be joining us virtually, lead South Asia Health and Education Investment Unit, Private Sector Operations, Development Asian Bank. Mr. Saurabh Suneja, Principal, National Investment and Infrastructure Fund, and Mr. Arpan Malhotra, the Senior Vice President, Zone India, Healthcare Strategy and Business Development, Siemens Healthcare Private Limited. So with that, for the context setting, I request the session lead, Mr. Sunil Thakur.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Very unusual scene. You generally don't see this kind of audience and attendance right after lunch. I must thank Dr. Kocher, who I guess has enabled this. I guess this is a very interesting topic, which is health financing in many different ways. It's got to, it's about insurance, it's about financing infrastructure, and enabling in building the entire healthcare ecosystem. So I believe health financing is one of the most important levers that can make a vast difference to where we are on the opportunity gradient of economic welfare. What I mean by opportunity gradient is the difference between providing the right kind of finance to generate about $3 to $4 in economic progress. So that's the positive side of the opportunity gradient that we see. If we don't get it right, then in a country like India, we risk sending about 60 million people below the poverty line. So that's the gradient and slope that we are talking about. The good part for a country like India and most other emerging markets that we see in Asia is that healthcare has become front and center of government policy making. More importantly, the desire to create the right ecosystem for healthcare, universal healthcare, within which health financing becomes very, very important. So, the way we look at how can we enable any economy to progress in the right direction with healthcare financing to move in the positive or towards the positive slope of that opportunity gradient. It's about three things. Finance, insure your population. So put money into individual manage high quality, outcome based healthcare, and in that process, also create a good, affordable healthcare. So this is going to be a 2-hour session, so brace up for it. We will try and cover the important aspects, the three pillars that I mentioned. It's about creating the flywheel effect to solve for a very optimal universal healthcare. So it will touch upon the most relevant topics, the three pillars as I mentioned, covering the subject of PPPs, which is very important and relevant for a large country like India, how to partner with private sector from the public side and create the right infrastructure for people who need the most. Then on the insurance side, while the government has embarked on covering 40%, the top 30% already sort of caters for it. It's the missing middle that we are now trying to solve for. So what are the means, mechanism, experience from the developed markets and some of the successful emerging markets that we can incorporate to cover the balance 30% to make it more inclusive? And lastly, using the significant purchasing power and the available infrastructure, if we once we implement it, how can we bring in a value-based care model in the country? So for that, we've had an assemble of the best minds that we believe can discuss the topic. So people from the government, regulatory body, private equity, investment banking, hospitals, and few other sectors. It's divided into three parts, starting with a presentation on health financing paper, which is done by PwC, a great work, as I'd mentioned in my opening session. It's one of the best health financing papers that one can sort of read through. And thanks, Dr. Rana, Ashish, and the entire team. So Ashish, who has worked on this project, he's going to take us through that paper to set the context. And then we have two sessions, discussion sessions panel, to discuss PPPs of what are the right models and how can we create the right structures to deliver a good PPP model in the healthcare space. So what are the challenges that we face so far and what all can we do to make it successful? And secondly, to weave in how we bring the missing middle, by taking the advantage of PMJY model, both on insurance and infrastructure support that we have to enable, an inclusive model through the insurance scheme that we can bring in. So sorry, the first session is going to be chaired by Mr. Rajiv Kumar Sen, Senior Advisor, Niti Aayog, moderated by Mohit. And the second roundtable session is going to be moderated by Dr. Rana, who's partner with PwC. So with that, I hand over the stage to Ashish.
Perfect. Thanks, Sunil. So while we were deliberating on what topics to cover from a health financing perspective, we realized there are three core agendas, as Sunil also mentioned, right? We as a country are in extreme shortage of beds capacity. Even at a hospitalization rate of 4 odd percentage, with only about 1 per thousand vis-a-vis global average about 2.7, right? And when this number increases to 7-8%, we'll feel a dearth there, right? So that's one area where I think as a country we should work for. The other aspect that came into mind that while PMJY and allied schemes cover significant proportion of the population, 60 odd percentage gets covered there, 10 odd percentage by self and corporate insurance. There's a 30% population that has no coverage, right? So what can be done to serve that missing middle? And thirdly, how sort of currently we are focused on fee for service, and how as a country we can move towards value-based payment and DRG in this case, which will make it more efficient as well as effective from a quality perspective, right? I think fortunately even Dr. Paul, out of the three topics highlighted, two of them being very critical from a country perspective, both in terms of infrastructure creation and how we can serve the missing middle. And there's a thought process that we have in this paper. So what I'll do is I'll run quickly through the three topics, and obviously then the panel will deliberate and discuss, and obviously one can read through the paper in detail and sort of get back to us of any queries and questions. So I think starting with the sort of the VGF scheme that we had, I think it was extended to healthcare in the year 2010. Uh, by and large, hardly any progress. Three were announced, again not awarded. In 2020, the government came with a revised VGF scheme, right? And I think this is the broad summary. There are two sub-schemes within that. State government, central governments can propose, but and the government, central and state government can put up 60 or 80% of the capex requirement. And I'm highlighting capex requirement because that's where one of the challenges arises. And the requirement or the bidding criteria is by and large what minimum capital grant that the operator is willing to take. That's how the tenders are being evaluated. As I said to you, I think it has its own set of challenges. That is the reason why it has not taken off and not become pretty successful. It is by and large taken from an infrastructure-oriented background, which is more suited to roads and ports and so on and so forth, where the capex is a significant proportion, right? And OPEX amount is very low. And I think Sunil also mentioned this point, and we did ran some simulations. Over a 30-year period, even for a 100 or 200 bed hospital, and OPEX is at least 25 to 30 times the initial capex value. From a provider perspective, a scheme that enables OPEX realization or ensuring that there are no losses there in terms of operations is a much more attractive scheme than a capex oriented scheme, right? So that's one thing that is a challenge with the current structure. A lot of PPPs and also required are located in routine remote locations. Having said that, while sort of the requirement is there, but if you sort of look at the larger ecosystem and you're talking about doctors and also ensuring that patients are able to commute, that becomes a significant challenge in a lot of these PPPs. So I think selection of location, I think is an important aspect that needs to be worked on. The other aspect is from a financial viability perspective. If you combine the fact that most people don't have volume guarantee, there are price caps, there are bed reservations, and on top of that, if you lay the fact that OPEX is by and large a provider's responsibility, it makes it a bit unattractive from a provider perspective. That's one of the challenges from an overall financial viability perspective. And some of the KPIs also sometimes very stringent and strict, which again makes it unattractive from a provider perspective. Having said that, I think we saw two examples where some of these challenges were being addressed. The example what you see on the left was the example where NH sort of did this PPP with Mata Vaishno Devi Shrine, right, where the OPEX was guaranteed for 5 years, right? So I'm not saying this PPP success or not, but I think from a concept perspective, this is one of the rare cases where OPEX funding was guaranteed from the shrine, right? So at least made sure that for 5 years there is no funding losses, and obviously the payment also happened on a monthly basis. And going back to even to the dialysis session we had, where I think all the providers highlighted that payments are typically delayed 6 to 8 months, which becomes a significant burden from a working capital perspective. The other examples you on the right, again, non-hospital, but I think clearly the payment was happening via TPA. So the contract says 7 days, but even practically not delayed than 20-25 days. So that ensured monthly regular payment. Plus also there was a skin in the game. The 10% contribution was made back to the local district hospital. So they made sure the funneling used to happen and the patients used to visit the center for PPP and not elsewhere. So I think that ensured sort of a continuation of volumes and some semblance of volume guarantee in that sense. UP has a draft policy, sort of again not going to detail, but by and large one significant change if you see somewhere in the gray box in the middle, right? The determination criteria is being proposed to be more OPEX, minimum OPEX, which is being quoted as a viability gap funding and not CAPEX. So I think that's one significant change that at least sort of we have now started hearing with state government. So I think that's one important change that we are seeing. In terms of recommendations, sort of again the paper covers the detail, but by and large, what we're highlighting is the fact that it should move towards more of OPEX funding. And I think the perfect example is the UDAN scheme, where I think the subsidy is given on a per seat basis, right, to airline companies. I think healthcare is a similar comparative. So I think that's one aspect. I think looking at some aspect of volume guarantee in terms of maybe either a narrow networking or government making to sure they're creating hub and spoke and so on and so forth. So this sort of summarizes the first topic. So moving on the second part, I think clearly this 30% population is about 40 odd crores today is not covered by any health insurance scheme. And that's the reason why our out-of-pocket expenditure is 48% vis-a-vis global average of only 18%, right? So there are two reasons, out-of-pocket and missing middle. Out of pocket, I think we studied, the paper highlights few case studies about health savings account, and I think one or two countries where it's an integrated plane. Also for universal health coverage, there are multiple models being funded by the government itself. There are models around copay, there are models about employer self-pay, and so on and so forth. What we have tried to look for is maybe an innovative thinking and an innovative solution. Given the fact that PMJY has created a network in terms of empaneled hospitals, SOPs, criteria, can the private sector insurance companies, in consultation with the government and the providers, come out with an affordable product, right, which can leverage the PMJY network to an extent, agree on a pricing that is beneficial to both the providers as well as the patient, and then offer a viable solution to meet the missing middle, right? And that's where sort of I spoke about this 9% is currently covered by self-pay and corporate insurance schemes. 61% is via various central and extended PMJY and state government schemes. There's 30% which is a missing middle. And that's where I think the insurance company can think of an innovative model using leveraging the PMJY network. Sort of by and large, I think what needs to be done here is all three stakeholders, I think both the payer, which is the insurance companies, the government, and the provider coming together. I think biggest role from a government perspective is to allowing the leveraging the PMJY network in terms of systems, infrastructure, and so on and so forth, helping in creating consumer awareness as well as helping in distribution. Because one of the challenges that will come is about adverse selection and a cost-effective distribution, with the government using its technology-enabled apps as well as post offices and so on and so forth can help really distribute these products. Insurers obviously need to work on very innovative products leveraging data analytics. Also, I think they have to look at very innovative channels of distribution, especially self-help groups and cohorts, which will help in minimizing the risk of adverse selection. And providers need to align with insurance companies to agree on tariff rates, which will enable patient to an affordable rate, but also enable the provider to have an efficient ROI. I think that's a very important aspect that needs to be factored in per se. So this was again from a missing middle perspective. The last topic that we covered was from a perspective of moving from a fixed fee for service to a value-based care and a value-based payment model. Sort of globally, there are multiple models. Fee for service largely globally is used for outpatients. In the Indian context, also by and large used for inpatient services. DRG is the model where sort of globally it has moved towards inpatient care. Multiple sort of countries are doing it. Capitation is a fixed amount, and the entire thing is managed. A lot of the GP network globally is done via that route, and global budget is largely for public hospitals. To add to that, from a pay for performance perspective, is typically bundled with a fee for service or a DRG based system to incentivize outcomes. In the Indian context, if you see on the left is what today's situation is. We have a fee for service sort of rate by and large from insurance companies, especially PMJY. There's incentive and outcomes, which is normally measured by accreditations, right? So that is the current system of 15% top up given. Also, there's some incentive based on the location as well as level of care provided. What is being proposed, there's already a draft paper where they're talking about this splitting this 15% into 7.5% for accreditation and 7.5% based on certain parameters of outcomes, which are by and large related to customer feedback and grievances. There's also a pilot which is being sort of undertaken where they are currently collecting data to move to a DRG based system, which will sort of pay based on clinical characteristics as well as combining those groups. I think from a DRG perspective, what's important is what you see on the left is the fact that currently a lot of avoidable spending can be avoided. A lot of tests and procedures are not necessary if you move to a DRG system, which will enable at the same level of expenditure to cover a larger number of procedures or a larger number of beneficiaries, right? And globally, there are multiple studies, right from ranging from 5 to 30% reduction in cost when the system is moved from a fee for service to a DRG based system. It takes time. US took 15 years, Medicare, if I remember correctly. Estonia took 10 years. We can hope that with all the IT stack, digital stack that the government is working on, the movement can be faster for us. But I think it's important to identify the groupers on which you sort of combine the disease areas as well as cost ways that needs to be given. There are ready-made groupers available globally, or India will need to develop on its own. But I think it requires some work. These are the building blocks: system classification, data collection, cost weights, as well as reimbursements. Quickly, sort of maybe last slide for me. I think currently we are in the preparatory phase. We are collecting data from an NHA perspective, but also we need to build capacities, IT, human resources, to be able to implement DRG system design and implementation. The next requirement will be to do a pilot phase by geography or by disease areas. And then sort of once the pilot is successful, it can be rolled out over the years. Summarizing, I think first topic, infrastructure creation, I think we need a improvised VGF scheme. Missing middle, I think there needs to be an innovative solution where the payer, provider, and the government all come together. And in terms of value-based care, I think DRG is the one, and I think the government is already working on it. I think this is the last slide. Would request all of you to read the paper. If there are any comments, thoughts, feedback, feel free to reach out to NATHEALTH or to us as PwC. We would really love to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashish. Thank you, Sunil, for setting the context. Good afternoon, everyone. This session, we have 5 panel members, and we have the Honorable Senior Advisor of NITI Aayog, Mr. Rajiv Kumar Sen, as the session chair. We have gone about selecting this panel fairly carefully. We thought we should have good fireworks as well in a post-lunch session. Therefore, today we have Visa, who is the founding partner of Tata Capital Healthcare Fund, India's foremost investment fund in the healthcare space. We have Pankaj, who represents IFC. Pankaj is the investment officer at IFC. Through the virtual session, we have Dr. Pranav Mohan, who is the lead South Asia Health at Asian Development Bank. We have Saurabh Suneja, who is part of the policy and strategy team at NIF, India's sovereign investment institution. And to my left, we have Arpan Malhotra, who is the managing director of Siemens Healthineers. So we have gone about creating a good eclectic mix of themes. Why don't I start with individual questions to our panel members on the particular topic? And I would love to start with Saurabh, who represents NIF. Saurabh, as you think about from a sovereign institution, from a private investment in healthcare, what are the key challenges that you have seen in the PPP viability funding schemes created by the Government of India first? And have you explored such initiatives?
Thanks. And I see that in Ashish's presentation also there has been a fair amount of focus on understanding the viability gap scheme, and I agree that it otherwise it was invented for core infrastructure, and then the concept has now been starting to get applied to other areas including social infrastructure. So see, we are a active and growing investor in the healthcare space, and to that extent we have we have in the past and even now we keep on examining what are the newer business models where we could apply ourselves, as in apply our money. So and there are at least a few companies in this room right now who are in a way we have had the opportunity of percolating capital into those companies. So and I think this the fundamental let's say the difference in the universe why VGF was created versus healthcare is that viability gap funding in case of healthcare, if it only speaks to capex, then we are again we are not trying to gel the realities here. And to that extent, while we have studied the VGF model extensively, my view would be that VGF could be an interesting tool, but maybe it is not the peg to hang your coat on when you're thinking about structuring a PPP. And PPPs may need to be structured from ground up, making the models fundamentally more attractive, making the models more bankable and more attractive, or showing these models to the private sector early on to ensure success. So maybe reforming or wholesale changes to VGFs could be one element, but may not be the end of the road in terms of making more PPPs happen.
Thank you, Saurabh. As we spoke about the Government of India schemes, we also have Pankaj, who has personally worked on, and IFC has personally led the PPP at a hospital in Patna, where they advised, I remember in 2015, and that hospital got commissioned in 2020-21. Pankaj, can you please help us with your learnings from that initiative and that relationship?
Thanks, Mohit. I think situation has changed considerably over last 8 years. I mean, when we were doing, the first super specialty PPP in Bihar, I mean, their ask was very clear from the government that they wanted a Delhi style or Mumbai style corporate hospital in Patna. Because the CM and the current CM also, he just wanted to avoid situation where, people from Bihar are just sitting outside AIMS and Max and all. So they wanted a similar hospital at Patna. But when we started working on it, we learned a few lessons. Because we also tried to do a project in Jharkhand before that, and two critical lessons that we learned, and that helped us in successfully closing that project. One, that healthcare project, particularly super specialty hospital, cannot be seen similar to a physical infrastructure project. That's a very common problem we face when we are talking to bureaucrats in state. They think that since it is a PPP, so the way they structure power project or a road project, because we advise all sectors, health is on other side of the spectrum. So I'll just take 1 minute. When roads PPP started, the typical players were contractors. So they were already in habit of running around, government department to department, chasing their payments. For last 100 years they are following this. So for them, going to government and getting, on an annual basis, payment basis, it was a natural movement. So they, picked up PPP very easily. Health is more a pure private enterprise. So traditionally, health investors are pure private. It's like a hotel industry. So for them, you have to really offer a lot of attractive schemes to come and join PPP. PPP is in the middle of pure private and pure government. It's a risky for a pure private company, and it's also risky for a pure EPC contractors also, because here you are taking a long term risk. You are investing in a hospital and you are not sure whether you'll be able to make money or not. And then there are some restrictions also, because government is giving land. In some cases they also give VGF. So it took almost 1.5 years to understand from various stakeholders. I mean, two major stakeholders: investors, the hospital players, and the government, because both are equally involved in this. And we have to basically bring both of them to the common ground, that if we want to do a hospital PPP, then you have to have very clear understanding what government wants from the project, and you have to also give adequate flexibility to the private sector. So there are two issues that we face, lot of challenges. One is the price flexibility. So the first challenge that we faced was that, since we are giving land at prime location in Patna, they should give 30% beds free. And the common benchmark that time and even now was Apollo Delhi, that that 25% or 30. So we were very clear that there cannot be any free thing, because free distorts the market. You can have some subsidized rates for poor people or lower middle class people, but there cannot be any free beds, because the moment you have free beds, it gives perverse incentive to the investor to then cut corners and basically not provide services. So then we visited a lot of private hospitals, all the big five, and we found that the sweet spot is that about 20 to 30% of the beds they are quite happy to provide at subsidized rates. But they would like full market flexibility for remaining 60 to 70% beds. So somehow we convinced them, and then in Patna we agreed that 25% beds will be at subsidized rates and 75% will be at market rates. The next question was, what is the definition of subsidized? That's the biggest challenge in healthcare. And that's where we have made some progress in last 5-6 years. But at that time, there was no such benchmark. What can be considered as a subsidized or affordable rates? Because for a government, and the model was that for those people, the government would be reimbursing. So nothing will be free. For investor, every patient will be paid. But then for those beds, government will be reimbursing the payments. And then we could find out that fortunately, the CGHS scheme has got some semblance of affordability. Market was also okay with that rate. And it is also politically more acceptable to government that, okay, at least some beds are assigned to CGHS rate. So that was agreed. So overall, we could convince the market and we got good bids also. And finally, the project was awarded to Medanta. So that was one lesson we found, that you have to match the stakeholder expectation. That's the main lesson I would say that I learned, and that applies to all health PPPs that we are currently doing.
Thank you, Pankaj. Apan, if I can pick your brains now, as the leading provider of equipment and services towards our industry, how do you deal with PPP projects or clients which have a large proportion focus towards PPP projects?
No, thanks, Mohit. So, working with the service providers, I can at least share, what's the feel like while being on a PPP project. Uh, See, I mean, if we look at our country and the other sectors where the PPP has had a fair bit of success, that's been in roads, ports, airports, and actually not so much in railways also. I know they have not been happy doing that. Now, the private players, for the private, I mean, the government intent is absolutely understood, which is accessibility, reaching where infrastructure does not exist, and the second is affordability. And from the private players, I think keeping it very simple, for a private player to survive, two things are extremely critical. First is profit. Let's call it a reasonable minimum profit. The second is real profit. I mean the cash. And these are the two main agendas with them. So in the earlier session it was talked about, and it will continue to be talked about, that the what's on the mind of the private players, will the money come or not? Yeah, and that's that. Maybe picking cues from some other, let's say, areas, it would be good that even if the different state governments are doing it, there be a special purpose vehicle, in each case, so that hypothetically, even if a particular state has a reputation of not paying money, the private players are assured that because of the presence of an SPV in between, the money will come. So that's one. And then the second point I'd say is, see, typically on the healthcare space, the entire, let's say, the financials in the deal depends heavily on the assumption on the volumes. That means, it can absolutely go upside down if the assumption of volumes, I mean, is, the number of patients or the number of tests, whatever we want to call it. And there is, one area that probably needs to be again deliberated and left on the table. If you look at the, the Niti Aayog guideline on the PPP, which is very nicely articulated, really helpful, that the states are supposed to adopt in their own way. It talks about the most prevalent model, which is the bot and the combination managed contract with the build, operate, transfer. And somewhere it states that the purpose of doing that is to share the risk of demand with the private player. And this needs to be relooked. So maybe I'm wrong in saying that. But I think if this volume assumption, either by way of a minimum guarantee, which may be too far-fetched, as Ashish talked about, but if it is not possible to have a minimum volume guarantee, then somewhere the rates have to have a correlation with the volumes. If the volumes tomorrow change, if the number of patients, number of tests change, then automatically the contract provides, or the the concessionary agreement provides a mechanism of the rates undergoing a change vis-a-vis the volumes. I think these two things can really turn around. Thanks.
Thank you. Visa, over to you. You have had experience not only in dealing with PPP in hospital space, but in the diagnostic space as well. Sir, thank you. Can you please give us the learnings that you've had in PPP in the diagnostic space, especially?
Thanks, Mohit. So we are a pure private capital investor in the healthcare space. And at least in the last 10 years, when we have evaluated companies across the healthcare spectrum, right, be it diagnostics, single specialty, multi-specialty, medtech, I think we've been, it's a revelation that it's now taken for granted that dialysis is one where across the board you're seeing, where PPPs is accepted. And even in the last panel, we saw that even there are some issues, that there need to be some nitty-gritties, etc. The second aspect is coming to diagnostics. In fact, we've had a very successful experience with investing in a company in South India, where PPP is a small aspect, but it's been a nice win-win situation for both the private player as well as the government player. So in this case, this is a company which is operating in the PET CT space, and it's in Tamil Nadu region. Madras Medical Services, which is a private public provider, wanted to provide affordable as well as for the affordable care for the poor, and be able to go into high-end diagnostics, especially on the PET CT. So here, what they decided is that, as a model between the private and the public player, you agree on what you called as an, own build and an operate, where the public player provides the facility, all the utilities that are required for the facility, and the private player, which is in this case the private company in Chennai, they would manage the operations of this PET CT, and they would also pay for the maintenance. The investment by the private player was somewhere around 8.5 odd crores, and it was a 10-year duration project. But the terms, in terms of the financial viability, where we saw was a nice win-win, was that on one hand, obviously, the public player gets 10% of the proceeds on every scan that is done. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is the payment for the private player happens in 7 to 10 days. And even on a worst come worst basis, at best, it's a 35, 40-day delay, even on if it's delayed, right? And more importantly, from the contracting term, the only term that was agreed was that the private player has to agree for something like a 95% uptime, and provide for some kind of a backup in case there is a downtime, where, they have a tie-up with another vendor kind of a thing. So overall, I think from a payment perspective, also pricing, the pricing was somewhere close to the market pricing. And that we thought was a nice way. In fact, that was, out of all the projects that this company is doing in the city of Chennai, this has probably been one of the best experiences. So there has been the PPP business and the non-PPP business. The PPP business actually turned out to be very nice. And within, I think, a very short duration, they've actually reached full capacity, to the extent now they are trying to negotiate in outside outside the Chennai region into places like Coimbatore, Salem, Madurai, etc. So I think that's been a fairly nice experience that we've had as an investor in the diagnostic space.
Thank you, Visa. Thank you. Pranav, over to you. The key question we have is, you obviously have also dealt with multiple enterprises undertaking PPP projects. What have your thoughts been if, should the government split such contracts into two, partner with infrastructure businesses for infra creation in healthcare, and partner with healthcare operators for managing them? And have you come across such thought so far in the country?
Thank you, Mohit. Mohit, I think based on my
Sorry,
experience,
Pranav, we can't hear you. Can someone help, please? Just give.
Yeah. Am I audible? Hello?
Not yet.
Okay. Am I audible now?
It's fairly faint.
Okay.
Can you try saying something? Yeah. Pranav, can you check the settings or the hardware at your end? So why don't we just go ahead? We'll just.
Hello, sir. Please say something.
Am I
Please switch
audible
on your
now?
camera as
Am I
well.
audible now? Am I audible?
Loud and clear.
Yeah,
Loud and
sorry,
clear.
sorry for the tech issue. So, Mohit, thank you, and my apologies to everyone. This is, in my experience over the last 10 to 12 years in the health sector, one of the main learnings I've had is that uh, it's one of the most critical bottlenecks in healthcare is the ability to manage projects to develop new hospitals and new infrastructure, right? And as you've rightly said, and most of us in the audience and in the panel would know that running a hospital is totally different ballgame from building new infrastructure. And this has been one of the major, in fact, issues we face when developing PPP projects and also while investing as well. From an investor perspective, it's not very conducive to invest in a project which has a large greenfield component as well. So if you have, let's say, PPP projects which have greenfield components, investors such as ourselves or even private equity investors would typically avoid, because it will clash with the exit horizon. It will clash with it will create issues with timelines, with the time paybacks, etc. So I think it is time we considered splitting the two aspects of healthcare, that is the infrastructure component and the delivery component, and looking at them differently. Infrastructure can be scaled up very quickly. There are very good companies in the country who can develop hospitals and who can build hospitals quickly. And the government is also has significant capacity in managing construction projects. Though, to be very frank, government cost for hospitals is sometimes higher than the private sector, but it is something that can be considered. And if that is done, that will lower the entry barriers for the private sector into getting into PPP projects in difficult areas. Right now, most of the investment is happening in good markets, right? But that is not necessarily where the requirement is from an access point of view. With a organized and systematic approach to developing infrastructure first, in collaboration with the private sector, of course, the barrier to entry for operators will be lower, and for investors, the risk to investors such as ourselves, that the payback cycle of the project will be delayed, the EBITDA margins will be negative when our exit time comes up, or there might be some gold plating in the project cost. That risk will also be taken care of. So there are some innovative ideas. For example, in the earlier panels there were discussion on REIT as well. So maybe one of the options could be that the central government and state governments form an SPV, which creates such assets in specific areas where they identify there's a requirement, in consultation with the industry, and then the private sector takes over the operations of these hospitals. The key issue to keep in mind is that the private sector should have a buy-in very early on in the infrastructure creation. They should not be engaged after for example, the building has been created, right? They should be involved from the very early on. So, in fact, there are several good projects that have been done recently. One project that has been done in Jharsuguda by government of Odisha, which has followed this model, where the infrastructure was created first, and then the private operator has come in as a PPP operator.
Thank you, Pranav. Saurabh, getting back to you. You spoke about the Government of India scheme. Have you also come across such VGF schemes developed by the state governments? Any particular ones which you like to highlight and your learnings from those?
Hey, thanks, Mohit. So, I think again, Ashish also alluded to it, and we have come across the draft policy that the UP government has come across. It has, to my understanding, it has not been applied yet to projects. So we are in the kind of early days. Uh, I would, however, kind of maybe take this opportunity of also talking about viability for a private sector player, probably not just in terms of the capex etc. Probably another way in which state governments can think about enhancing, say, viability for a project would be to make the projects simpler, more executable, keeping the bankability aspects
which are beyond capital subsidy support. For instance, how do you deal with the existing employees? A lot of people talked about the pendency in payments. So in a way, these could be shadow viability aspects which are right in front of us. Many times in the hands of the governments or state governments which are curating the projects. So that could be kind of kept in mind. As far as the state government viability gap schemes are there, at least if you look at the uptake of the central scheme, and over time this central government VGF scheme has been revamped. I understand that Niti Aayog has also been pretty involved when that revamping was being done. Probably, I think the exciting part would be to apply this to a few projects, rather than state governments trying to come up with kind of newer or parallel VGF structures. I think we haven't really done enough PPPs in out there utilizing the VGF scheme for it to for this practice to get percolated. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Visa, if we can go to you next. As a leading private investor, what are the extra checks and balances that you go through as you think about investing in businesses that have a PPP component, especially as you also think about a time horizon exit for yourself?
Yeah, no, thank you. It's a very good question. I think time is the essence. Clearly, it's the biggest currency today, right? So, and PPP projects are fairly long drawn, right? So that becomes one aspect, one criteria when we want to evaluate a project. But from a holistic standpoint, I think when you when you evaluate a particular company which has a PPP exposure, first of all, what is the concentration of that exposure? Which states, right? And more importantly, if we have to drill down into each of those aspects, what are the payment terms? How is the money coming? Is it coming directly from the government or through the TPA, right? So to that extent, the risk is relatively different across the two. Is there a budget constraint at the government level where there can be delay beyond? Yes, you anticipate that there's a delay for 6 months or so, but can there be a delay for 1 year, 2 years, etc.? So that becomes a very big evaluation. Second is in terms of a balanced risk sharing criteria, right? So, obviously, in certain sectors, it is important to go through a PPP route, but what is that proportion to which you're going about? And more importantly, how is it that both the government and the private player, it doesn't need to be tilted in favor of one player, but how is it really balanced enough such that you see a good return on investment, say at least in 3 years, 5 years, etc. So some of those criteria then comes. Then the third is also the entire technical aspect, right? Aspect relating to technical capabilities, finance capabilities, then your contracting, legal capabilities. So all this, do both the partners have a balanced approach towards all of this? Because you start negotiating a PPP contract, it can get into years, right? And as a private capital investor, you want to see closure of the project and get going on, and start seeing how those businesses are beginning to fire. So some of these aspects become very important, and most important is, and from an exit criteria, when we have to exit to another investor, how is that incoming investor going to look at this kind of a project? Is it going to grow exponentially when we are over the next 4-5 years, or is it going to be a pretty balanced? So these are some of the criteria I think we would generally look at.
Thank you, Visa. Pankaj, if we can come to you, IFC also would have a lot of experience dealing with PPP projects with governments across the globe. Can you highlight some examples of those and the learnings that you as an institution have had, which we could imbibe in India?
Yes. So, as I was telling in my first, response, in terms of structuring health PPPs, there are a few constraints that we face everywhere. One is that some availability of site is an important thing. So I assume that is the basic condition for any PPP, particularly hospital PPP, that public sector must be ready with a clean clear site. Sometimes the site is not available and that delays the whole project, or site is not clean without any encroachment or other things. But the usual constraints that we face is, as I said, while we faced during Patna structuring also, there are a lot of concerns about price flexibility and bed flexibility. And that I have already explained, so I don't want to detail that. But the other couple of things are that, see, there are PPP can only serve or solve some of the challenges partially. For example, one of the reason government wants to go for PPP because they think that they cannot get lot of super specialists. Now, private sector can get specialists, but not at all locations. So if you want to do a project in Mumbai or maybe Nagpur or Pune, yes. But suppose you want to do a project, let's say in a very remote district, even private sector cannot do that. So you have to understand that PPP cannot solve all the problems, what government is unable to solve. So that's one. Sometimes what happens that government puts lot of unrealistic expectations in a PPP that, even if you're doing a project in a tier 4 town or tier 3 town, you want all the super specialities to be included in the project as a mandatory department, and that becomes a challenge. So we take a lot of time in convincing, and sometimes it takes some time. So that is having realistic expectation on manpower availability, because as all of you would have seen in last few years, particularly after Ukraine crisis, that we have very limited seats for super specialties. So we have very limited supply of high quality super specialties, and they are not easily available to serve, in very far locations. So that issue we have to keep in mind, and that itself is a bigger issue even for government sector, how to address that. So that is another issue that we have faced, and linked to that is that, unrealistic expectation on departments or specialities. One is related to manpower, plus also some of the specialities are very complex and they are very expensive. So it is unrealistic to expect that private sector will provide those specialities very early on in the project or in a very far location. So having a realistic expectation is also key, in terms of structuring these PPPs.
Thank you. Thank you, Pankaj. Arpan, if I can come to you. Have you had a chance to study PPF, PPP, VGF schemes in other sectors, non-healthcare sectors? And what are the learnings from those which can be applied?
Yeah. I mean, other sectors specific. Okay, let's first have the VGF. I mean, on paper, if it's about the percentage, then healthcare PPP should have clicked by now. And the extent of disbursement in VGF should have already happened. So the viability gap funding, again, I mean, the condition remains, one can up the percentage or the amount 100 crores and then you go to a committee 200 crores, this and that. But there is a rider that it's the lowest bid that comes. So eventually it's the mathematics of the total cycle. Learning from other industries, I actually talked about it in the last. So if we were to be focused, let's say on a airport, port, and let's take the roads. Yeah, let's restrict to that. Not the way those contracts are structured, but there is one inherent advantage in that which does not exist in healthcare. And I again go back to the point of volume. So let's take an example. If a private concessionaire gets an airport, you won't be worried that the passengers might take, another airport and fly off because there is no other airport. Or if, somebody builds a highway, then they will end up taking that highway. But in the private district, partnership, this aspect has to be, customized for it. I mean, specifically on others, one example that you also raised the question, like, what happens outside India and whether decoupling. If you look at a specific case of the state of Victoria, Australia, they have a mechanism to ensure that the private players are actually deburdened of extreme volume risk. So maybe that's one area that can be studied. And sorry, I'm sorry. So I assume only the last thing was not heard. So, one example that I was giving was the state of Victoria, which has been pretty matured on the PPPs.
Thank you. Thank you. I think also want to ensure within the timelines. You have heard from investors, you have heard from sovereigns, you have heard from medical institutions. We would love to hear Mr. Rajiv Kumar Sen's views as well. Sir, over to you in terms of how can Niti Aayog help us more to create more practical PPP and practical VGF options? How can we spread this far better?
Thank you. And thanks to the organizers for inviting me. I was getting a bit scared because so many people are speaking, and then, when it comes to me, so I was thinking whether I'll be able to respond to it. But I have heard everyone. So first is the presentation, the paper that was presented. Of course, we have not seen the entire paper, so I would like to have a copy so that I can go through it. Now, based on whatever I've heard, two things. One is, I think we have to look at the VGF scheme from two aspects. One is the framework of the scheme, and second is the implementation aspects. Now, what I heard is that, the health sector or running a hospital is different from other sectors. Definitely it is. But when we are talking of a viability gap fund, the basic assumption is that there is an issue of viability. It could happen in other sectors also. But then in sectors like, say, roads, ports, in the other sectors where this scheme is operating, there would be lesser instances of such, viability not being met than in the social sectors, that's the health and education. So the entire purpose of bringing in this second part of the scheme was this, wherein we have what we call a viability gap fund for the CapEx and also for the OpEx. So we have to realize that, government is not aware of the issues that face the social sector, specifically health and education. That's why the second part was brought in, where we have a OpEx subsidy also for 5 years up to 50%. Now, having said that, it's not that there are no issues. There are issues. And any PPP structure for that purpose is the efficiency or the efficacy lies in how you mitigate the risks. So the points that were made, volume risks you don't get doctors. These are all very, very, what I call valid issues which faces the health. But then, if there are problems, we should also have, innovative ways to get over them. So I'll just, dwell on a couple of points as far as this VGF is concerned. Is it not possible that, a single bidder tries to bid and get in the vicinity? For instance, in UP, in a particular area, there are 4 or 5 such VGF schemes which are coming up. So if they bid and they get all the 4 or 5, then they can get what is called economies of scale. Doctors, it's not necessary that you have to have a dedicated doctor for each of these facilities. They could be moved around within that vicinity. Again, these are, I'm not saying that all the ideas would fit everywhere, but these are some of the things which we need to see. Perhaps if we do that, that would help. Secondly, implementational issues are definitely there. Payment, certainty of payment. There are instances where you don't get the payment even after 1 month, 2 months. So those things, I think, should be brought in. And at the contract stage, I think these are issues which need to be addressed. And I agree that, there should be a commitment, as Madam said, that, the risk has to be borne equally. It should not be unfair or overly fair to any one side. So those, I think, are issues at the contract stage. But to be very frank, I don't think there is anything wrong in the framework of what we call a VGF funded PPP or a PPP with VGF. So that is my first point. Second point is, I am a student of economics. So, in economics, there is a saying called supply creates its own demand. So if you see today, I mean, it's a universal fact as far as our country is concerned that there is a shortage of hospitals, there is a shortage of availability of medical care, especially tier 2, tier 3 cities. So looking at the aggregate, from the aggregate point of view, there is definitely a dearth or in the supply in tier 2, tier 3 cities. So, if a good facility is developed, initially maybe there would be issues of volume. But I think over a period of time, that could be overcome. That's my feeling. But then, yes, it doesn't happen overnight. It has to happen over a certain period of time. So again, for that, that's the whole concept of risk sharing. That neither you nor the government. What is the problem from the government side? Other than expertise, the resources. Today we need so many hospitals, so many medical colleges, which given the government resources, it's not possible to build. So one purpose is to get the capital in and then build it and then run it. So both expertise and capital are to be equally shared or shared in a proportion by both these sides. Now, one view was that, we build the hospitals, government builds the hospital and then hands it out for, running of the hospitals. That I think is there, but that's a slightly different model from what we have in the PPP framework. So, again, I come back to that point that I don't think the model as such is bad or the model as such, is not workable. But I think within that model, we should try and innovate and find solutions to get over the problem. So that's my overall, read about this PPP VGF funding. But if there are any specific questions, I'd be very happy to address.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Mr. Sen. I think that led us to the concluding remarks by the session chair, Mr. Sen. Would love to see if there are any questions from the audience which our panel members can look at. Else, would love to thank each one of them. Any questions, anyone? Looks like there is none. Thank you. Thanks a lot for each of the panel members, and thank you a lot, Mr. Rajiv Kumar Sen, for being available at our session. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you to Mr. Sen, and thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the moderator. And with that, we are going to be moving to the next session. Would like to once again apprise our August speakers. On behalf of you, we are going to be planting 50 trees. That's going to be planted at the AIIMS Diogar, Jharkhand. Moving on to the next panel of this session, now looking into the leveraging the network to cover the missing middle and linking reimbursement to health outcomes. The session is going to be moderated by Dr. Rana Mehta. Just take a couple of minutes to set the stage towards that. Dr. Mehta has more than 21 years of experience in strategizing, in planning, commissioning, and operations of over 75 hospitals and healthcare systems around the world. Our speakers of the session will be Dr. K. Madan Gopal, the Senior Consultant, Niti Aayog, Mr. Gautam Chakrabarti, Senior Health Finance Specialist, USAID, Mr. Amitabh Dubey, Country President, Novartis India, Dr. Rajiv Singhal, the founding member, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Morengo Asia Healthcare, Mr. Amol Naikawari, the Joint Managing Director, Indus Health Plus, and we'll have Mr. Mayank Batwal, the Chief Executive Officer, Aditya Birla Health Insurance, who joins us virtually. Welcome to you, sir. So the stage is set for the discussions. I request and invite the moderator and the eminent speakers the session to please take center stage. And we take these discussions, 45 minutes panel discussion, leveraging the network to cover the missing middle and linking reimbursement to health outcomes.
Are we missing someone?
No, we have one virtual speaker. So no missing middle.
Okay, there's no missing middle. Thank you. Thank you, and it's again a pleasure to be here. I think when we started this on the missing middle, there was a lot of apprehension. Should this be done? Is it viable? Will the government look at it? But I think one of the most resounding things today morning was Dr. V.K. Paul saying this is something we need to do it together. We need the private sector, we need the operational efficiencies of the private sector, and look at the infrastructure of the government to develop something for the 300 to 400 million, we don't know exactly, who would probably be out of the net. We've also linked this to the networks and the outcomes. So I think this is going to be a very interesting session. I must thank NatHealth for putting this together. What you see in the paper is also a culmination of various stakeholders. I think we spoke to stakeholders in India, we spoke to stakeholders globally to bring a perspective, because I think a lot of these areas are very, very complex. They don't have a straight solution. And it's not that every country in the world has actually succeeded. I think as India, we are in a very, very unique position. The government's moving away from predominantly becoming a provider to become a payer. A very similar situation which the US was. And today morning, I think one of the questions was how much of the GDP does India spend on healthcare? But the US government at that time used to spend about 3 to 4%. So we are a little better. But I think the biggest advantage we have is what they didn't have in the 60s and 70s. We have technology. And so obviously we can leapfrog. And tomorrow we talk about a healthcare system. I think if we get the missing middle right, people will talk about an Indian healthcare system. So I'll start with Dr. Madan Gopal. Dr. Madan Gopal, we'll start where your boss left. He said, we can work together to make this happen. So what do you think are some of those building blocks we need to put in to make sure that the 300 or 400 million people don't get left out of this whole thing? Because if you're going to have universal health coverage, this is equally vulnerable. The first 500 have been taken and assured by the government. But like you said, the missing middle, the action needs to start now.
Thank you, Dr. Rana. I will just go back to 2018 when we were working on this missing middle report. It was immediately after the launch of Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, which has, as Dr. Rana has pointed out, covered 500 million. But there were some other schemes which have covered the organized and the other person, and this was the population 300 to 400 million, which was left out. Now we have to find out that, and if you look at the out-of-pocket spend, because universal healthcare is to see that the catastrophe due to a medical episode or health episode does not influence, and that is measured in terms of out-of-pocket expenses. At that time, the out-of-pocket expenses were around 68%. That means people are paying the health expenditure which happens, 68% of the health expenditure is borne by the people themselves from their pockets. If you want to imply in very simplistic terms, that means around 1.4 billion people chasing after 1.5 million healthcare providers purchasing their services. That implies like that. So unless and until this thing is consolidated, so it is not going to impact reduce the out-of-pocket expenses. Many efforts have been made by the government, and they are trying to consolidate that PMJ program coverage as well as the ESIS. These are the two things. When the missing middle talks about, they usually say that you can extend that thing. That was not the intent of the report which we have published. It was basically to promote how the private sector can come forward and cover this population, address the challenges which we have identified in that report, and come up with a product which is viable. This missing middle population, they have a paying capacity of 4,000 to 6,000 rupees. But the existing market packages, they are all premium-based packages. Apart from that, they are adverse selection, which is impacting the other things. There are many other things. We thought that it would be at least pushing ways for having a standardized product. In fact, the IRD has made efforts for standardizing their product, and they are having Arogya Sanjeevani. But the uptake of that kind of products is missing. It's not that high. But nevertheless, the insurance sector is growing, and now around 11% population, that this population is now. Previously, when we were making that report, it was around 6%. Now it has come to 11%, around that 11%. It needs to go because these are the people who can pay, who are healthy. But if a product is made affordable, obviously the coverage will increase. The second aspect which we have identified in the course of the discussions was the awareness aspect about the products. Whatever the understanding, because these are all young population uh, and they are not aware that these kind of things are also existing or not. The other aspect was which we have highlighted was identification of person and the adverse risk selection. And I don't know what has happened after that because we were expecting the people to come together. They could have a subscription model as the private medical colleges. They have a subscription model. They adopt around 100 to 200 villages and they provide subsidized services to the people who are subscribed to that institution. That model was existing and it has worked better. And we also thought that this will at least trigger the development of new products which are available and affordable by this size of population who can afford around 4,000 to 6,000, 7,000 rupees per annum. But nevertheless, that products are not there and the available products are out of reach. While we are making efforts for strengthening the PMJ program and the other programs meant for this, the social code, which is now into operation, that will cover another set of population, but still around 300 million people will be left out. We have to find out a solution for them. And this is work in progress. I think some viable solution. We thought that private sector would be coming forward and bringing in efficiencies and addressing the challenges which were listed out in that document. But we are just waiting to see whether it will happen or not.
Thank you. So I think the takeaway is that it does require a lot of work, both from the government and a lot of innovation, both in terms of distribution, both in terms of who's going to take the risk. So Mike, you're online. I'll go to you next. So I think protection for such a large mass of people, there needs to be predictability of costs and outcome. And somehow, that's still not happened in the insurance industry. There also needs to be a price discovery on, what could be the premiums. And finally, I think one of the things which Mr. Madan Gopal also referred to, which is important, awareness. The consumer should see value, right? Because this is going to be voluntary. So how, from a private sector lens, do you see this playing out in the next 5 years? Mike, I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now, loud and clear.
Okay. Thank you to NATHEALTH for inviting me for this. I'm sorry I couldn't join in person. Rana, I think this is a very important point, and as Mr. Madan Gopal also mentioned, this is a very large segment of our population where we need to provide some kind of a health cost financing mechanism. And since the government has already taken a call on where they will fund, we'll have to jointly find an answer to this segment. I think he also very rightly mentioned that there is a need to look at product awareness, distribution, and a few other aspects such that overall offering for the this set of 300, 400 missing middle, where the affordability level, as he very rightly said, because that's our assessment also as an industry, anything between 4,000 to 6,000, and a subset of that maybe can go up a little bit higher, but broadly in that segment there are 3 or 4 issues to be resolved. One is that we really, whatever may be the products, I think, for example, he mentioned that we created an Arogya Sanjeevani product, which was broadly in that price range, but it did not pick up. And I think one of the things that has to be addressed, there is awareness that there is a good, affordable product which meets the requirement of this particular segment. And I think that awareness will have to be created jointly by the industry. There could be a role that the government could play, bodies like NHA can play, and I think we can jointly find a way. I think the regulator is trying to look at something like this. So I think we can jointly find to create more awareness, because if not, that anti-selection will ultimately make this product unaffordable. Because at some point of time, only if the people who really need it pick up, and not the entire mass, because insurance is ultimately a game of volumes, and the entire the full superset to be covered, not just a subset which needs. I think we need to find a way to make that happen. I think the other thing that is important there is the fact that there is also a question of affordability and the predictability of for the consumer, where finally what is priced in the product. There is a cost of distribution and the cost of healthcare delivery. Finally, these are the two key components in any insurance premium. If we find a way to create more awareness such that we don't have to incur a higher distribution cost, and for example a platform like Bima Sugams etc are coming in, there are other a few platforms where we can put in the whole ABDHM, the whole healthcare delivery platform that is being thought through digital. We can think of putting some of these there also, so that the cost is low. But I think the key component is how do you find a way to make the healthcare cost delivery affordable and predictable? Because today, recently, a work was done by IIB, which is a data body of IRDA, and they looked at the now all the data is being shared by the industry with them. About 25% of the insurance cost payment claims is actually under what is called fraud, waste, and abuse. Now, if ultimately that is all passed on to the consumer, because how can in the long run that has to be there. I think the whole infrastructure that has been created by NHA for the Ayushman Bharat scheme, PMJY scheme, if that can be leveraged, one, because a lot of the delivery, what we're talking of, will be in the smaller locations also, not just in the urban cities. So the network where it is, and also the cost, we can look at a slightly revised cost there, the whole framework of fraud, waste, abuse. Of course, on top of that, other components can be added by the private sector to kind of see how it meets the need of the the mission middle. But clearly there are more than a few components. In fact, in between, NHA had opened up this conversation with a few of us. I remember we signed an MOU also, like many other insurers. It didn't move too much, but I think it's time to reopen that whole chapter and conversation, because I know that the industry is very keen to explore this fully. There are lots of conversation going on within the industry, the HICC, which was a health consultative committee created by IRD, and this issue has come up there. Experts like Dr. Shetty have given their views on what can be done. So I think there is definite, but we should leverage the public properties and assets that have already been created for schemes like PMJY. And I think the last scheme I like to say is that we should not look at only the hospitalization cost coverage. There has to be a way to cover the out of hospital cost, because if Mr. Madan Gopal mentioned that there is a 68% out of pocket, a large part of that out of pocket is the non-hospitalization cost, which today is just not insured in any of the schemes. So even government has spoken about the health and wellness center primary care coverage. So I think primary care and the secondary tertiary, all three should be explored. The question is, in primary care, what should be the network to deliver all of that? So I think there are definitely some questions that we need to answer together, but I can't see that why through a route of piloting a few initiatives we can't find the right answer, as we have found for many of these other issues that need to be dealt with. But happy to
Thank
take up any particular question on this regard later.
Sure. Thanks, Mayank. So I think the two things, the first I think is let's keep the conversation on. I think that's to bring it back onto the table. And the second point is obviously how, if this innovation has to happen, the infrastructure which the private sector is also, the public sector is creating. The third component is, I think, through ABDM, the ability, because today we have very little data on, both from an epidemiological and an actuarial viewpoint. How do you build that over? Because again, like you said, this is a very large mass of people, maybe one of the largest cohorts anywhere in the world. And that predictability needs to come in before the private sector actually steps in. Great. Uh, Gautam, I'll go to you next. I think, one of the biggest problems, again, which has really happened is, if again we go back to the US example, is, you were 5% when you became from a provider to a payer. You're 18% and you're not able to control costs. So costs just spiral up. Also, once it's a political issue, you cannot really roll back benefits. If you tell a population you're covered for 5 lakhs, you can't tell them next year you're covered for 2 lakhs. It can only be 7 lakhs. So I think the whole component of what creates value in healthcare is something we should look from day one. Because I think the US model looked at volume and they forgot the value in healthcare. So I think healthcare is about infrastructure, it's about process, and it's about outcomes. As the government's becoming a payer, I think what's the focus on outcomes? And you were telling me this is not alien. We've done this in India. So we have a blueprint which we can rely on.
Sure. Uh, First of all, thanks to NatHealth to really organize that and giving us the opportunity to speak about it. You actually talked about outcomes, and I think in the earlier sessions also we had been talking about infrastructure and processes and human resources and all that. I believe in the health sector, when we are looking at how to finance it, there are different ways of doing it. But if we really see what exactly we are procuring, especially we means the public systems, public institutions, whether it is the government, whether it is the donor community, the multilateral agencies. So the whole focus there is purchasing certain health outcomes. So whether we cover certain segments of the population, whether we have certain hospitals, ultimately what we want is those outcomes. Now the way we finance it is mostly through inputs. So how many hospitals, how many equipment, drugs, and all that. But what we tried in India in last 3-4 years within USAID, along with various partners, is try to see if we can shift this financing from inputs and processes to procuring outcomes. Now, procuring outcomes is a very different ballgame because we have to shift our procurements from procuring goods and services to procuring impact. And the essence of that is first having a matrix of what is that impact that we are talking about and how to price it. Pricing inputs is very easy, but when we want to price outcome, it becomes a mess actually. So what we tried out in Rajasthan is we wanted to do some outcome based funding for saving maternal health and saving maternal lives and neonatal lives. But we really found that when if your outcome metric is saving lives, you cannot really price it because one, pricing life is very difficult, and then there are so many interventions that go towards saving it. So we implemented a project on development impact bonds, the first development impact bond on maternal health globally. It was a 3-year project, but it took us 2.5 years to really structure it first. Because for us, it was, as I say, more of a journey of compromises because we started from saving lives. Ultimately, we agreed the outcome metric being the hospital ready for certification both of hospital systems as well as the clinical processes. So this journey really showed us that the way you can procure outcomes is a negotiated process where a lot of partnership is needed, a lot of dialogue is needed because the development partners, the public systems are looking for certain things in a certain language, whereas the private sector which comes to deliver that has a different language. So those conversations are very important, based on which we really figured out that not everything can be a outcome based funding in the health sector. There are certain things that are really open to it, and therefore we structured something like a TB nutrition pay for performance mechanism, where it was pretty simple. Patient completed treatment and gained weight. So these discrete things are much open to outcome based funding rather than things like quality and life saved and all. Uh, our take is there are certain things that we have not yet tried, and with partners it will be good if we can try that. And that is where at some point of time within USAID we were also in talks with Mayank and had some conversation around the outpatient based insurance. And there what we were trying to see is if we can have an outcome based funding for the reduction in hospitalization. But I think we still have a long way to go with, Mayank also alluded to that, that how we procure outpatient services from this network of fragmented primary healthcare providers is really a challenge. But with all this, I think one thing that we can take home is just like the infrastructure sector where we talk about asset monetization, we can think of impact monetization, putting a price tag on certain impact metrics, and then see how we put finances and let the market organize itself to deliver those outcomes to us. So with that, we'll be open for any further questions. Thanks.
No, I think that's excellent insight. How do you incentivize the outcomes, right? And, how do you monetize it? Because I think these are some of the building blocks we should put in here. Because 10 years later, or if we look at any of the healthcare system, mid-course correction becomes very, very difficult because, you're ensuring people across generations, and then to come back and say this component hasn't worked in hindsight really derails the scheme. Amitabh, I'll go to you next. I think, one of the things, and we've been hearing this since morning, is the whole accessibility to healthcare is always limited by affordability. And so what the government is doing is given financial access to 500 million people who, don't have the affordability in that sense. Now, when it comes to drugs, I think the same thing works. The affordability depends on whether you get the right drug or you're deprived of the latest drug. So, what are some of those changes you're seeing? Because typically within a hospital bill, about 20% relates to drugs as such.
Thank you, Dr. Rana. First of all, good afternoon to my colleague panelists, all the audience in the session, and a thanks to NatHealth for inviting me to speak at this panel discussion. At Novartis, we are based out of Switzerland, operating in 170 countries. And in India, we have a very strong presence, right from early development with 300 scientists to global drug development to corporate center as well as commercial authorization. We strongly believe that innovation is only going to benefit if it's accessible to the majority of population around the world. And as a result, we integrate systemically access strategies right from research, development, and availability of our molecules. We principally apply two fundamental things while we look at accessibility: innovative pricing models, which we have been doing in quite of LMIC countries, including India. In the last 5 years, we have launched 20 molecules with innovative funding solutions as well as emerging market brands. And the second is that we have got a global sustainability linked bond where we ensure that in the LMIC countries, we have provided almost 1.2 million patients innovative therapies. We have got global flagship programs, which features like sickle cell disease, leprosy, malaria, where we have catered to roughly about 31.2 million patients. And we have increased our funding by $250 million for malaria and other tropical disease. Now, having said that, and coming to how do we make these drugs accessible to a wider population, the first point I wanted to compliment is that we have made tremendous progress, and that wouldn't have happened without the government and the private partners' innovative ideas in providing access. Dr. Rana talked about 500 million which have an access today. We are talking about the insurance from private health. We have another population which is reimbursed. What I would like to bring across, Dr. Rana, is three basic pillars across. One is on reimbursement. There's a significant amount of population which get reimbursement. But as of today, we have the reimbursement decisions which are more pricing-led rather than value-led. And the way forward could be that we move from having a reimbursement which is pricing based to creating a national reimbursement drug list, which is most based on value-based pricing, and the decisions can be very effectively done on evidence-based procurement. And then this can be applied to state as well as central procurement agencies. The important part is that we are making significant progress, and I must compliment the government for establishing a health technology assessment India, which is looking into this value-based approach. The second, I go back to what Mayank said, and a lot of other colleagues have looked at. How can we participate with private insurance providers to have therapy area-based, innovative health insurances available? And there we have seen our significant progress. Again, Dr. Rana, where therapy area based along with innovative therapies, there are packages available today which can be brought about. The question always comes in, what's the premium and how we can make it more affordable for the missing middle. On the 500 which is insured, it is important to look at what are the packages that we cover, and are innovative medicines part of it, or can we look at something that we can supplement, maybe having a cost plus model, which helps us basically to have these innovative funding mechanisms available. Lastly, on the third point, which was also earlier in the earlier session was touched across, how are we innovating on health finance mechanisms in the country? That's a big area because we have significant amount of knowledge capital in the country, and we can innovate different health funding mechanisms. Some things like very clearly said health funding banks. We invest for our future in provident funds and other. We don't have a health fund where we are investing today. What are the ways we can create that to fund across? So there's a lot we can do going forward, but I also wanted to take a step back. That a lot has already been done also in the country to reach from where we were a few years back to where we are today.
Thank you. I think that was excellent, because I think what we're hearing, there need to be different structures. Insurance is for one structure, but overall there needs to be various things, like you spoke about the health savings account. The second thing I think you very rightly brought about was that as we get more and more innovative drugs, not using them could have different manifestations. I think a good example was, Sovaldi, which was Gilead's drug. At one stage, it was available for $50,000 in the US. But the whole idea was, do you actually allow it at $50,000 or wait for the patient to develop cirrhosis and then spend a couple of $1 million on the transplant? So I think these are going to be ethical questions as we keep coming in. And not using the innovative drugs could be actually not creating value for the system in that sense. I'll next come to you, Dr. Singhal. So, Dr. Singhal, I think we keep talking about, insurance, the premium, but the premium is always a function of what it costs. So the providers ultimately hold the key to the premium. No matter what they say, it's the cost. Even though the cost in India is, we say is 1/10 of the West, but still it's not affordable. Now, if we leave the 500 million people out, which are within the PMJY, but this 300 million can afford. They can afford both insurance. They can also afford quality care. So how do you look at it? How can we really build this component where we would say that there's high quality care, but it comes at an affordable cost? And as you're building a network of hospitals, what are some of those guiding principles you're putting in place?
Thanks, Dr. Rana. Let me start by answering the last one, which you said that while building the network of hospital, what are your key focus areas? Till now, I have heard three important components of Indian healthcare. Everybody has spoken about affordability, awareness, accessibility, these three components. When we started Marengo Asia, we added fourth A, that was the accountability component. We need to build accountable healthcare system which can actually address all the three A's. That is the most important. That fourth A is the fulcrum on which all the three A's are going to rotate. That only we can deliver a comprehensive, integrated healthcare. That's the most important guiding principle for us. We need to be accountable to the society. We need to be accountable to the patients. We need to be accountable to all the stakeholders wherever we build the platform. That's the important part of it. Having said that, the point in question today is, where is this missing middle segment which is sitting there? There's a 40 crore people. The volume is very high. And this 40 crore is just missing line. This is not a monolith. There are multiple segments of expenditure strata who are sitting across this. This is village within the city which we are actually looking at. People talk about, whenever you discuss about primary healthcare, people start taking the car and they will say, let me go to a village. But we are missing that. We have drivers, we have house helps, we have people who are actually making our life, day-to-day life easy. That is the village which has come to the city. How do we address? They do not fall into category where they can get accessibility for a below poverty line card. They do not have that kind of income where they can actually subscribe to the insurance product. That's the challenge. But going forward, this 40 crore is going to be the most important differentiator and a driver for a healthy economy of this country. If we want a healthy GDP go to 5 trillion, the most important is how to keep this 40 crore healthy, because this health of this particular missing middle is important to drive that 5 trillion. Now, what are the things we can do? Insurance people have spoken about it. We have actually not created an insurance product which can actually give entry to all the people, at least come to the OPDs. The OPDs are a complete missing link. So accessibility part is completely missing. How do you make healthcare accessible to the guy? and make OBDs as part of that. Their OPD investigations. How somebody will come to know without visiting a doctor whether he has a cardiac problem or a cancer problem because you have denied that accessibility. So somewhere down the line, any insurance provider who is in this room should consider saying that you are actually creating a barrier which now has to be lifted and say, boss, I need to basically create a product so that people can go and visit a consultant, take the consult. That's the most important part if we want to break this over a period of time. The other is, how do you create a product which is worth uh, trustworthy product in insurance? Because if you talk to the people, why people do not, because they think that even if they take an insurance policy, they will, that will be denied, it will have riders. The patients, when they look for a cashless, because this is the segment which is not carrying cash with them. They are looking for a product where they can move into the hospital, get their near and dear treated, and they walk out. But it does not happen all the time. That is the cause of concern. So one, bringing out a product, create a system where you increase their awareness and also make OPDs accessible through the product. That is important component of it. Today, all the healthcare operators, today, all who are sitting here, we all continue to say called drive business, increase occupancies. On one hand, on the other side, you have people who cannot afford, and that's the segment which is completely missing. Is there a way we can bridge the gap? Is there a way we can come out a product where it becomes more sustainable, more accessible to the people? So I think the last but not the least is that if we really want to create, we do not have to wait for some out of the world innovation. We have to start collaborating with each other, collaboration across industries. Today, how we can actually bring down the cost of CT scan or a MRI or a cath lab if we want to deliver same quality of healthcare. So I think all segments of industry have to sit together and start creating the so-called integrated healthcare product, which can aim at delivering a quality outcome to the people of this country.
No, I think exactly. And I think the biggest takeaway was that, in a way, we're not even giving health insurance. We just, covering acute episodic care. So we have probably have to take the building blocks towards health insurance. I remember, about 10 years ago, we did a project for a global firm. And they said, so they couldn't understand, why are we talking about this? He said, show me where's health insurance in this. And I think we need to revisit it. Amol, I think that's a great segue into it because we've all been talking about, treatment and how do we lower costs. But again, I think one of the biggest things as the government's moving away from a provider to a payer is that, like Dr. Singhal said, if you don't detect disease early, you're not able to not only pay for it, but both morbidity and mortality will go. And the whole system will collapse on itself. So I think the preventive component hasn't really been looked at it. While I think Dr. Paul said, we have 1.5 lakh primary care centers which have been done. But again, I think both in an urban and rural setting, this becomes the most important point. How do you see this panning out?
Thank you, Dr. Rana, and thank you, NATHEALTH, for this opportunity. I think you have brought a very important point, and you have also made a reference to what Dr. Paul said in the morning, because even when the PMJY scheme, they have tried to give an importance and emphasize on the wellness centers, which is equally important, because otherwise, if we just create a product, different price points which we have been talking about, but if we don't encourage people for early detection, then with the product in place, people are going to relax and they are going to be bothered, not being bothered, and only the claim ratios will go up. So like you rightly said, we have to create that culture of prevention. As an industry, we have to encourage more people that we can detect a problem at an early stage. The cost of treatment would go down drastically. Lot of like OPD and other parts which he mentioned, suppose we are able to detect them, we are able to guide them, post that, we will be able to avoid lot of admissions in the healthcare system. Otherwise, what will happen is initially we will have a product, but over a period of time, all of us will be forced to take the prices up, and which is our biggest challenge. Just yesterday, I was in Dubai. I'll just give that as an example. As some of you know, that they have a compulsory health insurance program in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. where there is also a product priced at a lower state of people. It is all third party paid because every employer is supposed to insure their people. And I had an interaction with a reinsurer. Unfortunately, that particular one of the biggest reinsurer is closing the shop, and now they are withdrawing the business. And when I asked them, that was the biggest loss making things for them over the years was the health portion of it. So initially, when 5 years back they launched it, everybody was happy that they have launched it. But since the preventive part was not built into it, or that culture never came, so everybody only went with an intention, uh, that because OPD is covered, pharmacy is covered, only from a curative point of view, and the claim ratios just really skyrocketed. So I think as an industry, all of us understand its benefits. I think Dr. Reddy also in his session, and that part is very close to him. Every time he emphasizes on the preventive part of the entire program. So I think if we have to really address these people, we have to take the next steps and create a culture of prevention that would really help. Thank you.
No, thank you. And I think that's very important. I'll come next to Dr. Madan Gopal again. I think at least the preventive side, leaving aside the large urban conglomerates, is always seen to be, part of what the government should be doing. And it's obviously done a great job because look at lifespan expectancy. But what are those areas where you feel, because it becomes a big imperative for the government also to detect disease early? So what are some of those initiatives the government would be putting in place to make sure that we have a much more healthy missing middle, which we can ensure?
Thanks, Rana. You have asked this question because taking clue from what the other speakers have spoken, one of the important thing, if you look at the way how we are transferred and made our journey in the health, first we used to talk about disease, then we have moved to health. From health, we have moved to wellness. From wellness, we are now talking about well-being. So our journey has been around that. In the morning session, I think Dr. Paul might have highlighted about the health and wellness centers. Previously, from the seventh plan, they used to be held. They used to be calling them as sub-health centers. These sub-health centers used to provide 6 set of services, basically focusing on RCH, communicable disease, epidemic-prone disease, then immunization, and the other aspect, other communicable disease. Now, after we being the signatory to the SDG goals, for achieving that, we have changed our strategy. Now, this health and wellness center, they are providing 12 set of services. And if you look at the program, when the Ayushman, this was the first program which was launched, Ayushman Bharat Health and Wellness Center, and the second program to prevent the financial catastrophe for the PMJ program, the Ayushman Bharat PMJ program. Both programs are complementary. This focuses more on the preventive, promotive, and the other aspects, whereas Ayushman Bharat, it focuses on providing the curative care aspect. And the continuum of care is to be care has to happen. That is a work in progress. NHA and the ministry, they are working in that direction, and hope so you will see that. And apart from that, if you look when the scale of services were increased from 6 to 12, one of the important component of services was the NCD component of that. That means mandatorily the people are screened for your hypertension, diabetes, as well as cancer screening is happening. It's in the form of only history taking right now. Pap smear and other things would be added in the subsequent thing. That means as we are grappling with the issue of communicable disease, non-communicable disease, and the RCH and maternity care, all the three paradigms are being taken care by this Ayushman Bharat Health and Wellness Center. And when a continuum of care and that mechanism is created, they will act as a gatekeeper for seeing that the patient doesn't land up into the Ayushman Bharat hospitals. That's the scheme. What happens in NHS is the family doctors who are there, the practitioner, family practitioner, they act as gatekeepers. Here, the health and wellness center would be acting as gatekeepers so that the load on the institutions is not there. Why it is important? Because even the 500 million people who are there, if you look at the NSSO data, the data on consumption of healthcare, the hospitalization is around 3%. If 3% of these people land up into the hospital, theoretically, if they land up into the hospital, do we have the adequate beds to cater to this population? Unless some preventive mechanisms are there. So we have to invest in the preventive aspect. Many programs are going on. The National Health Policy 2017, it talks about emphasis on primary health care as a strategy for reaching the Sustainable Development Goals to 2030 and the universal health care. So this is already policy enablement is there, and we are already doing preventive aspects in that directions.
No, thank you. And I think that construct is important because in many places, like we've seen, there is no alternate. And like, I think my colleagues on the other one said PPPs are fine, but, in a remote place, both the private and the public sector can't get it done. So, we have to do a reality check on everything. Mayank, I think, and we just have 5 minutes, so I'll request all my panelists to be a little brief. One of the things, Mayank, we always talk about outcomes. We say these are outcomes of the provider, right? But I think today we are all invested in our own health. And as a payer, it's very important for you to make sure the people you've insured stay healthy. So what are some of the things you've been doing to make sure this happens?
Yeah, very important point. I mean, I think at a macro level, uh, all of us agree that a healthy citizen of India is what is required. So I think as payers, one of the opportunities we have is that there's complete alignment of interest in terms of health between the patient and the payer, because both want the patient to be healthy, and there can be no lack of alignment here. And fortunately, the RDA regulations allow insurers to kind of find ways to incentivize consumers for good health. So, I mean, leveraging that, for example, we started this whole program where we say that how do we create access to good health to our and wellness kind of whole ecosystem to our customers. So we, for example, today digital health has become a very integral part of the whole healthcare delivery. So you provide that, and if consumers demonstrate good health behaviors, physical, going for a health checkup at our cost, etc. For example, today through this, people used to say that consumers don't go for health checkup. In our case, we have been, we have ended up getting at least 40% of our customers to go for health checkup after the policy is issued, which means they know their health condition better than what it was, before that event. And if they demonstrate good health behavior like good physical activity, we will reward them. For example, we give them the entire premium back. And I think the results are very encouraging, where consumers and across all ages, it's not just about young and healthy, it's about even people who are close to the retirement, they say, hey, we'll do this for our health. I mean, there are at least for 18 to 20% people who respond to this by getting into some health activity, and around 8 to 10% people who get incentivized. And I think that's the model that all speakers have spoken about: an integrated health and wellness, both access and delivery, and then how do you kind of incentivize the outcome. And if all parts of the healthcare ecosystem engage in this, I think that's the outcome that we look for.
Perfect. I think we'll have to attack it from all the sides. Gautam, very briefly, I think you really told us about how you work this in the public sector. How do you see how easy would it to be bring it into a scheme where we have a missing middle? How easy would it be, like you said, to incentivize them to make sure that we have the right outcomes?
I think to really do that, especially to capture this missing middle, and we all had been talking about uh, how to really cover a basic minimum package of primary health care, because that is essential. Just hospitals will lead to spiraling cost. And there, I believe there's a very, at the policy level, there is a great need to organize this primary healthcare market. Currently, it is very fractured. So 70 to 80% people of for OPD, if they depend on private sector, which is completely fractured, how do we really organize that? And I believe if we shift our financing from input based to outcome based, we allow the market to organize itself to deliver what we want. And that is where I also feel that at the government level and also multilaterals, bilateral agencies like us will really have to see to come up with policies which can really organize this market through different financing incentives than currently when we look at healthcare, we basically talk of big hospitals. But this is a different segment, and what incentives will help them organize. And if it is outcome based, I think it will be organized better. So
No, and it's true. I think when you leave the market, it brings in the best innovation to make sure that it delivers, as long as viability is there in that sense. Uh, Amitabh, very briefly, so the payers are very, very. You heard them. They're very keen to look at the innovative drug accessibility mechanism. So how do you see it playing out from your perspective?
So, thank you, Dr. Rana, again. For having an equitable access, it's not just the responsibility of payers. I believe the all stakeholders in the ecosystem of healthcare have to play a very important part, Dr. Rana. Let me just give an example for when you talk about payers, we have to look at how we can have evidence-based decision making for having a value-based pricing. We also need to look at how we can expand the formulary to include innovative therapies. But the second most important element is that we have to also look at HCPs, who are important stakeholders, which are doctors in the system, that how they can bring important value proposition based on the unmet need. And also, are they giving the right therapies to the right patient archetype to have the best outcomes coming out? And that in turn translates to how it's being reimbursed or insured by the payers. And then when it comes to the healthcare providers like us in pharma, we clearly believe that we have to jointly work with the payers and the other stakeholders to come up with innovative access solutions. We also need to work on healthcare strengthening, because if we don't have a strong, strengthened healthcare system, we will not be able to provide the access to the grassroots. And then also work together to have center of excellences in the system. At the end, we look out for a quadruple win, which should be a win for the payers, a win for the HCPs, win for the patients, and also win for the stakeholders involved in the system.
No, excellent. I think that those are the building blocks. Very. I know we run out of time, but I still want a word from both of you. So, Dr. Singhal, do you foresee in the next 3 years a different degree of transparency? Like we said, you can go and see the hospital's infrastructure, you can judge the processes, but you just don't know the outcomes. Do you think providers over a period of time should actually start publishing outcomes?
Dr. Rana, as I said in the beginning, the question of now accountability, and as the healthcare provider, I think it is our responsibility to ensure that the clinical outcomes are known to the people. That will be the game changer. That will be the differentiator, because it is important from the patient perspective. When patient walks into the hospital and is actually trusting everything which happens around the ecosystem about his health, it is important that the outcomes, he should be able to see what outcomes are there. The decisions which we take should be clinically driven. Today, there is a lot of element. If I look from a patient's perspective, you ask the patient to get an angiography done or angioplasty done or get a CT or MRI done, the first question they'll have is they will have a sense of disbelief. They will go to 5 other people and they'll say, I have been recommended, whether it is required or not required. Where it is coming from? It is coming from because people do not have faith in the system, because we as a healthcare providers have failed to actually set up the accountable healthcare. Moment we are able to publish our clinical results and our decisions are driven by clinical medicines, I think we will bring that desired change in the healthcare system.
Exactly. I think the whole idea of how can we make every stakeholder accountable in the system, and today, I think that just doesn't happen. So we have to do introspection and make sure. Uh, Amol, the last word. I know that over a period of time, as we're going ahead, uh, I think pharmacogenics are playing a much bigger role. So it's not the same drug for everyone. How do we get in? Now, again, we're going back to what creates value for the system. Now, this has typically been seen as outlandish, seen as expensive, and we don't look at it. But again, like I said, giving the Sovaldi example, treating it now rather than having a mortality or morbidity for life. How do you see this very briefly panning out?
See, so like we discussed, I think the entire focus, we are saying that if we are able to encourage prevention and preventive strategies, it will play an important role. Like, give an example, the part which you touched upon, that instead of giving a standardized medication or something, so instead of that, if a right medication or something is given to a person, the treatment cost will go down. The adverse drug reactions, which all contribute to multiple other things, would be better. The cost of treatment would go down. So we have to all try to use, as everyone is saying, that innovative solutions have to be used in the entire healthcare system, so that we are able to use efficiencies, and also with the help of innovation we are able to bring down the medication cost. Because in the entire thing, if we take this medication as a part, it in a typical hospitalization bill, it a lot of times contribute 25 to 33%. And if imagine if a right medication is not given, there are going to be readmissions, adverse drug reactions. So some of these things on a preemptive basis has to be inculcated, which will go in a long way in bringing the cost of treatment down.
No, thank you. And unfortunately, we run out of time, so I won't be able to take any questions. But I think the whole idea, and if we were to get this missing middle, we were to look at outcomes, very interesting. But I think the whole takeaway is we need to move away from volumes to value. For every component, we need to say, does this create value for every stakeholder? Does it create value for the provider, the payer, the medtech company, the pharma company? And finally, most important, the biggest stakeholder, the patient. I think if we put these principles in place, I think we will move out towards the universal health coverage. I want to thank all my panelists, both physically and Mayank
Thank you.
virtually, for this enthralling discussion. And I want to thank all of you for being such a wonderful audience. Thank you and take care.
Thank you, Dr. Rana, and thank you to all our speakers. We close the session with a group photograph, please. And ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be moving straight into the next session, the quiz which we had planned, but in the interest of time, we're going to be moving next session. And would also like to mention that on behalf of all the speakers of the session, we are going to be planting 50 trees. That's going to be there at AIMS Diogar, Jharkhand. That's a commitment which comes from every member of NATHEALTH towards environmental sustainability.